So Pratt,
he comes to Washington with an idea.
His idea was to start a boarding school specifically for American Indian children. It was kind of a radical experiment.
Children would be taken, removed for several years at a time. They would be stripped of their, what was called their savage heritage, and they would be civilized.
It was forcible assimilation. Pratt had a slogan, "Kill the Indian, save the man."
That's Barbara Landis.
Carlisle Indian School biographer.
We went up to Carlisle to talk with her and her colleague Kara Curtis, and they told us that Pratt basically made that pitch.
Kill the Indian, save the man.
Not just to Congress, but directly to American Indian families all over the country.
I want your son? How does that work?
I want your children because white people are going to keep coming and coming. They want to settle in your lands. They want to take your lands. And you need to learn how to deal with these people. So we need to teach your children how to speak English.
We need to teach them how to communicate with the white man so that when the white man comes and tries to get you to sign away the Black Hills, you won't fall for it again.
And it was a convincing argument.
Well, you know, back in those days, you're talking about survival over here.
Would you mind introducing yourself?
Okay, my name is Joe American Horse. I'm 79 years old, and I'm a grandson of Chief American Horse.
Joe lives near the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. He's Lakota. He told us a story about his grandfather, who was a famous Lakota chief. In the 1890s, his grandpa led a delegation of American Indians to Washington.
Well, he went to Washington, D.C., and he was down there, but there's a lot of people down there.
Joe says his grandpa had this moment where he was just stunned by how many white people there were. His phrase was, "They're like ants."
And pretty soon they're going to come to our area, so he had the idea of trying to send his kids to school so they can intermingle or, intercept or whatever.
Basically, Joe says his grandpa just had this realization.
We can't go back. We got to go forward.
And it seemed to him Carlisle was the way forward. So where are we going now?
This is our photo archive.
As kids were admitted, here's how it would work. They would come in, and they'd immediately have their picture taken on arrival. Then they'd be given an extreme makeover, which would also be photographed. Wow.
This is Tom Torlino.
Wow. So this is Tom Torlino as he comes in.
Mm-hmm.
Barbara showed us a picture of a Navajo kid looking maybe 18 years old.
This is 1882.
This is when he arrives, so he's got kind of dark skin, high cheekbones.
He has long
Here you can see
earrings. He's wearing an elaborate necklace that looks like it might be made of bone.
and he's wrapped in a blanket.
And
And here he is in a suit with clean-cut hair. In the second picture, his hair is very short, not long.
no blanket,
He's wearing a three-piece suit.
sitting there with a cravat and a spread collar and parted hair.
Wow, it's like in a snapshot you have Tom Indian, Tom White Man.
Like my Aunt Sophie.
Joe American Horse said his family saw that transformation firsthand.
Aunt Sophie was there in Carlisle for 5 years. When she came back, she looks like a white woman. She has a real tiny waist and bonnet and everything. And she can't speak Lakota.
She forgot.
Uh-huh.
Now just think about this for a second. Just think about this. We spoke with one guy, Professor Eric Anderson, who teaches at Haskell. He's also part Potawatomi. Just imagine the parents, he says, the first time they see their kids.
Parents are seeing their students marched around in essentially the uniforms of what had not very long before, for many of the tribes, been the uniform of the enemy. I think that would be startling.
According to Sally Jenkins, after the kids were recropped and redressed, Pratt would run them through a bunch of drills.
I mean, Carlisle was a little military academy, and the Indian kids were so unhealthy at first. They had been put on an unfamiliar diet. They had been sleeping indoors for the first time in their lives, and a lot of them were getting sick.
I mean, we know that in the 39-year history of the school, at least 200 kids died of disease or poor health or even homesickness.
And so Pratt was constantly trying to get the kids outside, and at a certain point, he had hired some teachers,
Sally thinks that one of those hires,
probably one of the first dormitory masters.
this guy who had formerly taught at an Ivy League school, he showed the Carlisle Indian kids this game that the kids at Harvard were playing. Maybe he thought it would toughen them up, who knows, but suddenly, they were playing football. Now keep in mind, this was, at a point, talking 1882, where Football's barely a thing. Not so many schools had teams.
There wasn't such a thing as a head coach back then. They were volunteer coaches who tended to be students or ex-students.
But the Carlisle kids self-organize, level the field, start to play. They even start to scrimmage some kids across town. And at one of those games, according to Barbara,
Stacy Matlack, who was a Pawnee student at Carlisle, later became a Pawnee chief. He broke his leg playing football, and Pratt said, "That's it. No more football."
because in his mind he was trying to civilize these kids and football was doing the opposite. But a short time later, says David Adams,
Approximately 36 Carlisle boys came in to Pratt's office and they said, "We want to play football."
do we know what they said exactly?
We don't have the exact words, but Pratt says at one point, he says, "While they stood around my desk," I'm quoting here, "while they stood around my desk, their black eyes intensely watching me." He says the orator gave practically all the arguments in favor of our contending in outside football and ended up requesting the removal of the embargo.
According to his memoir, Pratt was sort of bowled over by the eloquence and passion of the appeal. So he said, okay.
You can play if you do these two things. One, he says, never slug.
People who are looking on will say, that's the Indian of it. Just see them. They're savages and you can't get it out of them.
Okay? And the other one was, you have to beat the best teams in America.
And at that early point in American football,
Far and away the most powerful team was Yale.
which brings us to October 24th, 1896.
It's a raw fall day in New York.
They played in New York.
Yes, at the old Polo Grounds.
Apparently there was about 4,000 people in the stands, including
A handful of newspapermen, New York newspapermen.
Really?
I mean, it was a big story.
How did they publicize it? What did they say?
Well, the newspapers became incredibly intrigued.
On one side were the undergraduates of an old and great university. They represent physically the perfection of modern athletics and intellectually the culture and refinement of the best modern American life. On the other side was the Aborigine, the real son of the forest and plain, the red skin of history, of story, of war, developed or veneered, as the case may be, by education.
And if you read the newspaper stories, they're written in this kind of blood-curdling, shot through with Indian cliches, you know.
Here come the Redskins.
Here come the Redskins.
Right.
according to David Adams in one paper,
There's a reference to yodeling. The writer said that and the fans were yodeling in that Indian fashion.
I mean, try to put yourself in the shoes of a New Yorker in the early 1880s. Your contact with an American Indian was in a Wild West show. It was theater. And here comes a football game, and all of these American Indian kids run onto the field. And there's literally an instance in one of the first games where someone in the audience says, well, they look just like our boys.
because of course, that's what Pratt wanted. Now, one thing that was immediately clear to everyone in attendance when they saw the Carlisle players was that they were physically outmatched.
Their average weight is 164, exactly 20 pounds lighter to a man.
The impression going in is that it'll be an absolute smear job.
Or at the very least, the odds were heavily against them. But 3 minutes into the game, in the midst of a big pileup, a Yaley fumbles the ball. It comes squirting out. Carlisle guy picks it up and runs the entire length of the field, 63 yards, and scores a touchdown. Now, nobody had scored on Yale in 7 games. They were furious, so what they do is they use their bulk to slowly push the pile down the field twice to take the lead. And with 3 minutes left, Yale is up 12-6. Carlisle has the ball. Carlisle running back charges the pile and gets clobbered, falls backwards, and just as he's about to hit the earth, he laterals the ball to a teammate who grabs it, runs around the scrum the entire length of the field, and scores!
Carlisle scores a touchdown that would have tied the game. But it's called back by a referee who was a Yale man.
Why?
The call was that the referee claimed that a whistle had blown the play dead.
And what was the crowd's reaction?
Well, they were furious.
Yes.
There were booing and hooting.
Everyone knew it was a terrible miscarriage of justice.
And some of the Carlisle players said, we're going to walk out of here. We are leaving this game. But according to David, at the last moment, Pratt runs down from the stands, comes onto the field and says, wait a second. Don't forget rule number 1. Be a gentleman.
Pratt did not want this game to end because of their tempers, even though they'd been wronged by that call.
So the Carlisle boys finish the game. And when they walk off the field,
They get a standing ovation.
Carlisle wins incredible respect and renown in the aftermath of the game. In fact, one of the newspapermen
After another Carlisle-Yale game where something similar happened,
wrote something to the effect of Carlisle could beat 11 Yale men, but they couldn't beat 11 Yale men and a Yale referee. Yes. After the Yale game of 1896, Pratt is committed. It is an instant way to do what he's been struggling to do for 15 years at the Carlisle School, which is to civilize them, but also to prove that given education and equal opportunity, they were the equal of their
That's interesting.
of their white peers. I mean, he was, for all of his forcible assimilation methods, which were, to remain extremely cruel and destructive, he truly believed in the concept of racial equality.
The complicatedness of Pratt and of the whole Carlisle idea kept smacking us in the face as we were putting this show together. I mean, on the one hand, there were clearly students who felt that Carlisle was prison. In fact, Barbara Landis, when she took us on a tour of the grounds of the former Carlisle Indian School, she said that kids would even set fire to the buildings.
It's, yeah, some did burn down, which is kind of typical on Indian campuses. A lot of fires and burning buildings.
Why?
It's a form of resistance.
On the other hand, when we started looking around for original archival recordings of some of the earliest Carlisle players, pretty much the only recording we could find
This tape, we would like for it to be as much of your making as possible.
was this oral history with a guy named
Your name, your full name is
Albert Andrew Exendine.
Albert Exendine.
all right.
The interview was done in the early 70s when he was 88. He entered the school
Just before 1899.
You were 15 years old.
Yes, ma'am.
I can't really play you too much of this because the audio quality is really bad. But in the interview, Pratt comes up,
R.H. Pratt, P-R-A-T-T.
and Exendine talks about him with a great deal of affection and gratitude.
We call him the father of Indian education.
We call him the father of Indian education.
Oh, he was a wonderful man.
So he's a tough figure, Pratt. He's got a very mixed legacy. I mean, I like to say Pratt was his country. Whatever you think of him, he was his country.
So 1896, he gets the bug. Like, he sees football's good PR.
Yes.
What happens next?
Well, he hires, he begins looking around for coaches, full-time coaches to come in and coach the team. And he winds up with a Cornell grad named Pop Warner, Glenn Pop Warner.
Now, Pop Warner was an interesting guy.
Pop's a little bit of an outlier. He's a bit of a rogue, can be kind of vulgar.
I like to party a little bit.
You like to gamble?
Yes.
Really? And that is exactly what he does in spectacular fashion when he gets to Carlisle.
Because Pop Warner looks at his squad and he realizes that
Sure, they're fast, they got heart.
they're underweight and they're small. They weren't going to beat the Ivy Leagues on any kind of consistent basis without doing something different. And there was a very fine line between innovation and cheating. And Pop Warner starts exploiting that line absolutely as hard as he can, and he comes up with the trick play.
For example, 1903.
Pop Warner devises the hidden ball trick.
What is that?
The hidden ball trick is the quarterback takes the ball and actually, behind this huge pile of men, tucks it under another guy's sweater. While the big pile of men is struggling in the mud in the center of the field, not knowing quite where the football is, but believing it's somewhere in the middle of the pile. Here's this kid who squirts around the end with the football hidden under his jersey, and he's 30 yards downfield before anybody realizes it.
How does he keep the ball from falling out of his jersey onto the
I think they actually sewed the jersey so that the ball would stay in there without falling out.
So they made a cheating pocket?
They made a cheating pocket.
Was that legal? Did they get a legitimate touchdown?
Was it legal, you ask? Pop Warner would have said there was nothing in the rule book against it. Another thing he does, which actually works brilliantly, is he sews footballs onto the front of their jerseys, which were really bulky sweaters at the time. He sews leather football-shaped patches onto the front of their jerseys in order to try to disguise who's got the ball.
Really?
Against Harvard. And the Harvard coach goes insane.
Well,
and
I
says,
would
that's
too.
cheating.
I mean, like,
Exactly.
have a semi-pregnant
This
player.
is the kind of thing, I mean, you know,
amazing.
But Harvard did not take this lying down. Harvard retaliates by painting the footballs the same color as their jerseys. It's maroon everywhere. So when they held the ball against their chest, the ball basically, well, you can't see it.
I mean, they all broke the rules. American football is essentially a rule-breaking experience. Every time Pop Warner came up with an innovation, the next year there was a rule against it. So immediately the Ivy League would get together and pass a rule and say, okay, no more of that. And that's how the rule book really burgeons in American football, and it's thanks to Pop Warner's sleights of hand.
And Pop Warner's greatest sleight of hand, and maybe the Carlisle Indians' most soaring moment, and I mean that literally, happened at a moment when the game almost disappeared. That's coming up.
Start of message.
Yes, this is David Adams. This is Conrad Crane. I got an email message asking me to read credit text. Radiolab is supported in part by the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, enhancing public understanding of science and technology in the modern world. More information about Sloan at www.sloan.org. Radiolab is produced by WNYC and distributed by NPR. Okay, there it is. Hope you can use that. Take care. Bye.
End of message.
This is Melissa from Cincinnati, Ohio. Radiolab is supported by LegalZoom, supporting small business owners across America for over 10 years, with services including business formations and corporate filings, plus independent professionals providing contract review and tax advice. Legal help is at LegalZoom.com.
We all feel different from our parents in one way or another. For some people, it's the color of their skin.
Hey, Mama, it's a black thing.
I freestyled a rap about race to my mom.
She won't understand because she ain't black.
I'm Hillary Frank, host of The Longest Shortest Time from WNYC. Join me for surprising stories of parents and kids and parents at longestshortesttime.com.
WNYC receives support from Sony Pictures Classics, presenting Coming Home, a new film by Zhang Yimou, starring Gong Li as a devoted wife who remembers very little of her past, including her husband after his return home, starts Wednesday. The Young Vic production of Arthur Miller's A View from the Bridge, presented on Broadway by Lincoln Center Theater in a 17-week engagement. Previews begin October 21st. Tickets and more information at aviewfromthebridgebroadway.com.
Hey, I'm Chad Abumrad.
I'm Robert Krulwich.
This is Radio Lab. And getting back to our story on the Carlisle Indian School and the birth of the modern game of football, one of the most important moments in this story happens at a time when football was right on the edge of disappearing. Talking about 1905. Okay. This was the most violent year in football to this point. 19 people died on the football field.
19?
19.
One death is a lot. 19? That's crazy.
Yeah. Because what would happen is that Carlisle would try and do these things to sort of open up the game. The Ivies would consistently respond by making the game more about brute force, more about violence. So you had all these deaths, and suddenly all the major programs were spooked. You know, Columbia pulls their football team. Harvard even thinks about doing that.
And so, and this is kind of odd, into the fray steps the President of the United States of America, Teddy Roosevelt.
In order to get...
Because he was a fan, according to Conrad Crane.
He liked football, he liked the manly aspects of it, the tough aspects of it, but nobody liked people dying.
And then there was his kid.
His son was playing and getting beat up pretty badly as well.
Broke his nose, slit his eyebrow.
In one game, he got knocked out cold. So after the violence of '05, the president calls the presidents of all these colleges and so on to Washington. And according to David Adams, he basically tells them
that the rules had to be rewritten. It had to become a little bit more safe at least, or it would be banned.
And out of that, we see a couple of rule changes. First, the schools decide, in order to loosen up the pile, so to speak, they're going to tinker with the down yardage ratio.
You know, instead of going from 3 downs to gain 5 yards, it becomes 3 downs to gain 10 yards.
3 downs to get 10 yards or 4 downs to get 10 yards?
4 would come a couple of years later.
Oh.
But the second rule change, which is maybe the most important for our story, is for the first time, they legalized the ability to move the ball through the free-floating air that surrounds us all. Okay,
so where do we go? What's the next?
So if I could place you in a moment, unless there's a moment before this you'd like to hit. I believe November 23rd, 1907.